So, good evening, everybody. My name is Motorayo. I am one of the project's program manager for Open Source Next, and we have our instructor here. Her name is Amber. She's here with us, Amber Adamson, and I think Adamson. Yeah, is that correct, Amber? Hope I'm not butchering
Adamson.
your name. Yeah. Okay.
Adamson.
So, okay, Adamson.
Yeah.
So, I want to give like a quick info about Amber. So Amber Addison is a CTO, that's a Chief Technology Officer for Care I've Made and Home Care LLC, which is a startup. That particular company is a startup. So and they are in charge of like home care SaaS products. So she's a full stack engineer, experience using React, Next.js, Node.js, TypeScript, and Next.js. So she's also an open source contributor and maintainer. She has contributed to a lot of open source projects. So please help me welcome Amber to our section. Thank you. Can I get some reactions? Like you guys should react now. Let's welcome our
Thank you.
instructor.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Amber, you have the floor. The floor is
All
yours.
right. Hello. Nice to meet everyone. Yes, so that's right. I am a I do work for a startup. I am also working, as Monterayo said, I'm working on several different open source projects. I got my start in open source this year, and the main project I'm going to talk about today is actually a project I started. It's my open source Wordle game. But this is kind of a straightforward game, so I may have a little more time. I may be able to talk about some of my other projects. I think I probably will, because those are more, collaborating with others, which is like a big part of open source. Before I start talking about my projects and just some of the things that I've done, I do want to make a little bit of an observation that I think some of you might, I was watching the presentation yesterday, and I noticed some people were asking, like, how do you get started with open source? And I think that's a really common question. People want to contribute to open source, but it can feel very opaque to outsiders. I often see people feeling, kind of overwhelmed, especially by the fact that a lot of I actually just had a talk with someone the other day about this, but a lot of what we think of when we think of as like open source are very high-end professional, like SaaS developer tools, things like, you said Next.js, that's an example of open source, or VS Code, those are open source programs. And so a lot of times people are kind of intimidated, or they don't know where to start, because the level of technology that people associate with the term open source tends to be very, like complex tools for developers, stuff like that you need a very like senior level of engineering to contribute to, which is not, it's usually not so helpful for engineers who are earlier in their careers and they're looking for open source to help them launch their careers. And so that's something that I want to talk about today, because the open source projects that I have contributed to and that I am working on are a little more the kinds of projects that I think would be friendlier to earlier career engineers. They're more like kind of proto startups that are like game applications, things that, pretty much anyone could contribute to. And so that's kind of going to be a theme of what I'm talking about today with open source, is talking about, finding projects that have like a community, that are more an app for, like, I guess you could say normal users and not just developers. So I am going to start, since I was asked to talk about my Wordle game, I'm going to start with that, because that's kind of what got me into really building publicly, sharing my work on LinkedIn and sharing my work on GitHub, and which kind of started to get people's attention. I will share my screen a little here in a minute, but it's It's a relatively simpler project. It's just a React Invite Avite project. And the reason that I built this particular project, I started building it in, let me go, I guess I'll go ahead and share my screen, but the reason I started building this particular project was because I wanted to practice my React skills. So I'm sharing my screen, so I'm showing you my Wordle game. Let me actually refresh this game. Okay, yeah, show my screen anyway. Okay, so you see it's pretty simple. The UI is pretty simple. I actually built this like light dark mode toggle myself. The reason that I started building this, like I said, was I wanted to practice my skills with React. I had just completed a Scrimba course on React, basic React, which if you guys know Scrimba, I would definitely recommend. It's a really great resource for learning React and front end. And also it has some back end now too, Node.js and so on. But the capstone project in the Scrimba course was to build a hangman game with React. And I had read that a good way to get started building projects is to take something that you built like with a tutorial and try building it yourself or adding a feature. So I took the idea of the hangman game and I decided from that I wanted to build a Wordle game because it's kind of like a more complex hangman. So it's kind of like adding a feature. And what I did when I built this Wordle game that I think makes it a little unique is I did not use AI to help me with coding. Now, I do use AI-assisted development now. I use Cursor with my larger and more complex projects. But at the time, because I was learning React and I wanted to get my hands on the fundamentals, I did not use it to help me with coding. I turned off like VS Code's autocomplete when I built this. I did use AI to talk me through what I was building, give me the logic of it. And then from there, I tried to figure out the code as much as I could myself. So it took me a long time to build this, even though it's kind of a simpler game because I didn't use the AI help at the time. I started building it in February and I got my MVP done in June. Or June, July, I think, because like I said, I was spending a lot of time with the word list. I went through and I curated the JSON, all of that. So it took a while for me to build this because I really made it hard on myself. But I learned a lot in the process. And the big takeaway is not even the Wordle game itself. I mean, I'm proud of it, but I think the even bigger takeaway is that after I built this Wordle game, I quickly evolved from before I was on tutorials to after I built this, I went from working on that to working on a startup, working on larger, more complex open source that's for users. Things like Next.js, authorization handling. I'll talk about some of those apps in a little while. But it really helped me. It was that bridge that got me from working on more basic applications to working on the kind of real world applications that will get you hired for a job. So that's something I want to bring up about, like I said, when we talk about open source or we talk about building things, often we think about these very complex projects, but sometimes these projects that may seem a little simpler in some ways, those are the ones that can get you from point A to point B to where you're building the kinds of things that can, have you getting success in your career, learning the fundamentals. So actually, I'll even play the Wordle game, make sure that it doesn't have any bugs. It's good to check. I learned this strategy. I always guess the word audio first because it has most of the vowels. And then based on that, I guess the next word. What would that be? Okay, well, I'll keep messing with that as I talk maybe. But so you can see with my UI here, I created these features. I created this light dark mode toggle. This is using local storage. So for example, if I turn it to dark mode and I refresh the page, it's still dark mode because the persistence is saved in local storage. And I also created this RGB keyboard so that this is a wave animation. I was trying to simulate the wave animation that you use with a gaming keyboard because I have a gaming keyboard. So I'm pretty proud of this. I built this, I scaffolded it. Like I basically, I built the grid, I built, you know, the different features. I had to do a lot of debugging with this application. I had to do like local storage debugging. Probably one of the hardest parts was handling the persistence. Like when you refresh and the word is still saved in local storage. That was, I had not worked with local storage before. So this was a lot of learning as I went and a lot of debugging. And like I said, that was really useful for helping me with like these kind of more complicated applications that I would go on to work with. If you want to, this is an open source code. So like this is my GitHub. You see my icon here. I need to update some of my profile stuff. It actually, one thing about open source, it doesn't really look like I'm contributing here, but I am. It's just that I'm contributing to open source and I'm in a feature branch, so I actually am contributing there. Here you can see some of my different open source contributions. This is the Wordle game. It's called Haschel because it's for like developers, so that's why. And then some of my other open source, Built in Public is an open source SaaS application. It's built for developers so they can build in public, as the name says. And this is one that I've been working on a lot. It's not Care Hive, it's Dance Chives, which my colleague Ben and I are building. And I'll come back to Dance Chives in a minute. I want to just show the Wordle code. It is open source. Now, I haven't really had a lot of contributors. I did have Steven here. He contributed a bug fix, so that was pretty cool. But I did apply for an open source license. See where that license is. It should say on here. I guess it doesn't say in the notes, but I got the MIT license. And another thing that I'll tell you is that when I got this MIT license for my open source game, I was able to use this tool called Browser Stack, which it lets you see how the game looks on many different browsers, like many different browsers and devices. So for example, I was able to look at how it looks on iPhone, on iPad, on Android devices, and I was able to debug some things because I was able to see it. And you can use Browser Stack for free if you get this MIT license. So, or an open source license. So my point in saying that is that there are benefits to open source. A lot of people will really respect you if you work on open source, which is what I've found to be true. And you know, I didn't even really, I haven't even really promoted my work that much. And you know, Open Source Nest reached out to me about this and about like talking about open source. So, you know, it's really, there are a lot of benefits for your visibility as a developer if you work on open source projects. But here you can see, you know, I try to write like a good README. This is the MIT license here. Okay. So I try to write like a good README. It probably needs a little bit of updating now, but, you know, I added accessibility. I added some testing with Axcore. These were the accessibility improvements. This change log. Like I said, this has been a couple of months ago now, but it gives you a lot of ideas about the infrastructure that I used for the project, accessibility compliance. I have a plan for end-to-end testing, scoreboards, maybe a back end. I've been kind of busy with some other projects, so I haven't been working on this quite as much, but it gives you a good idea of the stack. So like I said, if you want to build an open source, it's always good to have a good README like that. I also refactored, these are some of my folders. I also refactored this Wordle game eventually with Cursor. The original code was, like I said, I was a lot more junior back then, and it was pretty janky and brittle. So I had Cursor help me refactor it to make it a lot more modular. It still probably could use a little refactoring. It probably could use a reducer, but this is the more modular code right now that has more more use of React's features. I don't know if you guys know React, but this was actually something I set up in my code to handle the fact that it was not showing right on Safari browsers and on Mac OS browsers. It was some of the features, like some of the text was not quite looking right on Mac browsers. So I actually had to use this code here. And that was also something I saw from Browser Stack that helped me fix some of my features in my Wordle game. But yeah, if anyone has any questions on my process or on anything, I would be happy to answer questions. I actually meant to do a video talking about the process I used for the Wordle game. I haven't gotten around to it. So this is my first time really talking about this. These ally tests, this test suite, a lot of this was actually added by the AI, by Cursor. I need to kind of go through and I need to really go through and kind of double check all this. This is kind of, it's reminding me this is all on my to-do list. But yeah, I wanted to set up some test suites for accessibility and also some tests for end-to-end with Playwright, and also some unit tests. So this is the basic overview of my Wordle game, Haschel, which, like I said, I worked on it mainly from February until June. It would not take me that long now to build something like this, but I also would not make it as hard on myself as I made it at the time, because like I said, I really wanted to force myself to learn, every line of code rather than just having AI do anything. I do, since I am talking about open source and I'm talking about collaborations, I do want to, oh, you mentioned something. Like it's an actual necessity to contribute. No, it's, okay. It's not, I don't think it's a necessity to contribute. I think you can actually, if a project is open source, or even if it's a public GitHub, you can fork it and set up like a Git feature branch and start pushing code. It may or may not get approved, but I don't think you need a license for that. The license is more to kind of guard your assets, so to speak. It's more for setting the boundaries that you want to set for contributors, and also kind of making it official so that it will be recognized by some platforms. Like, for example, I mentioned Browser Stack. They have a free tier, and you can use their tools if you have an open source license. So that's the benefit of an open source license. It can be useful for, like I said, it's almost like putting your own, I don't want to say copyright exactly, but it's kind of like that, in that it's making it a little more official for what you're doing, and there are some benefits to it. I will be real, I don't remember all the different open source license. There's like the Apache license, there's the MIT. I need to sit down and compare them all. I think the MIT one is like a very broadly used license. So this is what mine says. Permission is hereby granted free of charge to any person obtaining a copy of this software, blah, 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 to deal without restriction. It's a very open license. I think it's one of the more open ones. Yeah, so it also, this is where it, like, the above copyright notice and this permission notice shall be included in all copies. So basically that's where it's kind of protecting me as the creator, that it's put there. But like I said, there are different kinds of open source licenses. I think some are more restrictive than others. Like, as I've understood it, I have not worked on VS Code, but I think they may have some, more restrictive parameters, which would make sense because they are public software. But like, to show you another example of open source, I'm going to kind of go over some of the other things that I've worked on as well, because I worked on like 3 open source this year. This is my friend's Minesweeper game, and he has an MIT license as well. He also has a code of conduct. So, that's also a good thing that you might want to set up, like a code of conduct for your open source. This is another good example of an open source project, like I was saying at the beginning, that is not as, like I said, is not as software focused, is not as difficult to contribute to because it's a Minesweeper game. And this particular project actually has a lot of people contributing to it. There's a Discord server associated with it, and I don't know if that's listed out here, but I would recommend, if you're new to open source and you're trying to find an open source project to contribute to and you're not sure where to start, I would recommend something like this that has a Discord server, that has like that's easy to find, maybe something that you can look for that kind of open source on Reddit, or you can ask people about it, ask around on LinkedIn. That's actually how I found a lot of these, because people talk about their projects on LinkedIn. This is kind of similar to my Hashful game. In fact, I've actually just rewrote I actually just rewrote the main app.txl file, app.tsx. I rewrote that file in this project. I used a reducer hook. So this is actually, well, looks like Nick has merged the branch, but this was actually my code. So this, I rewrote the whole original app.tsx for this Minesweeper game with the reducer hook. So again, it's a relatively simpler application. It's pretty easy to get started if you're just looking to get started in something like open source. If you're interested, I'd be happy. You know, Vinay still is taking contributors on this game. I'm sure he would be happy for the help. Didn't mean to click the profile. Also, I'll talk a little bit about this other open source that I've been working on, a couple of my other open sources. I'll just talk about a couple of others, actually. This is another one, built in public. Some of these names. Okay, so this uses a different license here. You see that this is the Apache license. So if you're looking to add a license to your open source, I would look around and compare the different licenses because they're a little bit different. So like this one, for example, I'm reading it. Something about ownership of 50% or more of the outstanding of shares, beneficial ownership of such entity. So this is completely so this is interesting. It's different. Like the fine print is a little different than the MIT license, as you can see. So I would definitely, like I said, if you're looking to build an open source, if you're looking to maintain an open source, I would definitely look at the different licenses and see which one is the one you would want to use. I would also, frankly, I'd probably ask AI, like, what are the nuances of them, because it's a lot of legal reading. But this is a community-focused platform for developers to build in public. So this is more of a SaaS application. It's been a little quiet lately, but it is another project. This one is a little more complicated. It's with Supabase. So there's a database, backend as a service. It's for users can like create accounts and log in. And the idea behind this is to kind of combine a little bit of the functionality of LinkedIn and GitHub. It's more of a networking site. Like, you can share your projects like you can on GitHub, but there's more of a UI layer. There's a little more networking, and that's why it's called built-in public. We just had a few contributors who've kind of stepped back from that. So again, that's something where I'm sure people would be happy for the help. Here you have, there's even like a wiki. So they set up a wiki for this one. And that's another thing. A good open source will often have a lot of documentation, a lot of wikis. Okay, so at this point, I think it would be good to kind of talk a little bit about Dance Chives, because that is the one that I've really been working on lately. This is my colleague's open source project, and it's almost like a startup really itself. This is Dance Chives. It is the one I've really been working on lately. And this is when I talk about open source and when I say, find something that's a little more like an app that people will use rather than, a complicated SaaS application. This is a really good example of what I'm talking about. He also has an Apache 2.0 license. But so as you see, this is kind of an example of some of the data. It is an application for dance events where the idea is that right now events are, a lot of times when people are hosting these events, there's not really a good singular location for dance events. Like, people will post them on Discord or not Discord, on Instagram, or places where it's or YouTube or places where, you know, it's very big and large social media. And our idea was to take the social media and kind of pull that content out, but just for like a specific niche. So for dancers or people who go to these dance events, to upload the information about it so that others can find the access to these dance events. So right now we've been working really on structuring this application. We've been working a lot on the user experience side of things. It's a Next.js application. We have set up, we're using two databases. We're using Postgres and we're using Neo4j. So we've set up Docker with the databases. It's a nice, large, complex application. We're currently handling, like, we've been debugging, we have a staging branch, and we're currently debugging the authentication and authorization flow. For example, when a user logs in with Google OAuth, we just had a little bug where it was redirecting them to the sign up page, or it was redirecting them. Yeah, it was redirecting them back, like they're needing to create a profile. So we've been debugging that. We debugged that. And I'm currently building for this application, I'm building a favorites feature or a saved feature where users can save events and also like mark them, you know, with a little heart, like YouTube favorites. So it's a really good application for just like shipping end to end, you know, all the features, building the UI, handling the data, passing the data around, things like Docker, things like, you know, backend, basically like all that functionality. So again, this is why I say if you can find an application like that in open source that is, I would say, challenging, but that shouldn't be too, you know, above the level that a lot of developers are working at, then I think that that is a really good example of something that a lot of people could contribute to. And what I like about these applications like Minesweeper, Built-in Public, and Dance Chives, they all have Discord servers. They all have like a community around them. I think Dance Chives, even, he may have even advertised on Reddit. I know he's been advertising on LinkedIn. So you can find some of these applications on LinkedIn. And if you go and you join these Discords and you actually contribute to these applications, you know, that gets remembered. That's someone who, like, if I were to ask Ben for, you know, a recommendation at this point, I think he would probably give me one because he said, you know, I've contributed consistently to Dance Chives. I'm helping him build the features. He's looking to monetize the app, and if that happens, you know, I'm right there. So I can potentially, even if it takes off, it can potentially even turn into like a startup, a paid opportunity for me. So these are all some of the benefits. Yeah. So these are all some of the benefits of working on open source. I do want to pause. I know I'm talking a lot. I do want to pause and ask if anyone has any kind of questions so far. Okay. Maybe not. All right. Well, I guess I think I'm going to have some time here. So I guess I can also maybe get into the code a little bit. Would anyone like to see any of the code or any of the process on any of these applications? Or does anyone have any questions about getting started, like how you would get started? Thank you. Okay, well, I guess I will, you know, since I'm showing anyway, this is kind of an example. This is actually what I'm like actually working on right now. This is me working on Cursor, where I'm setting up this is the Neo4j. So I'm setting up the Neo4j queries for saving the event for the user and unsaving the event for the user. It's a work in progress. I'm working on now. I'm about to work on the UI layer now that I've worked on the Neo4j queries. But let me run this and I'll show you an example. This is me running one of these open source projects on my local repo. So GM run. We'll see if this works, because this is what I mean about like a kind of nice, fun kind of complex Docker setup. I actually had to debug this the other day. Oh no, what's going on? Okay, so this is one of the benefits of working on these kinds of projects. Like this is my first time. This is my first time working with Docker, which is a containerization. We're using two databases in this open source. And so we have this whole like process. And that's actually something I would really say about open source that I think is also a really big deal. Um, you know, I don't know if it's, I know here we've had the market for tech jobs has been pretty rough. I kind of think it's been rough universally. I'm not really sure about that though, but I know a lot of people are trying to look to impress employers. And I think one thing that impresses employers and that really shows you're a versatile developer is that, well, I think that's actually what Docker is doing, though. I think that it's handling that. I'm not, okay, I'll be honest. I'm not really, I know that about concurrency and parallelism, but I'm not exactly sure. Like, I mean, I'm not exactly sure in practice how the application is handling that, but I will say that I think that that's what it's, the Docker is normalizing everything because he put it into this workflow. And so the two databases are talking to each other. But I will say this, to your question, I think part of it is that they're not, the databases are not handling exactly the same thing. They're not handling the same features. I mean, the Postgres database is actually for like login and registration. It's for the user data. And then the Neo4j database, I don't know if you guys know Neo4j, it's graph, so it's a relational database. It is handling the events. So the only place the two databases are really interacting in like the actual interactivity of the code base is that the user is interacting with the events to, yeah, that's the thing. I'm a little new to like this whole double database thing. It's this is wild for me. But yeah, the Neo4j is for our event handling and Docker is for the registration. So that's why we have two databases. But as you see here, you see how like it's so, there's so many little moving parts like with this. I think we're actually right now we're in the DevOps phase where we're trying to like streamline this down so that it's not so many moving parts. But this is Ben's workflow right now while we're in development, where you see we have these like it's a role-based authorization system. So we have base user, creator, moderator, etc. And then here you have the two databases seeding. So you have Neo4j seeding and Postgres seeding. So this is really cool for me. Like I said, I've learned a lot. Like, you know, open source can really advance you a lot in this kind of thing because like I had not used Neo4j before this. Now I'm writing Cypher queries. That's the Neo4j querying language. I had not I hadn't worked with anything with two databases before. I knew what Docker did, but I'd never worked on an application that was complex enough to need Docker at this point. But now I've worked with Docker. This whole like flow, I've had to debug this flow. I had the other day when I tried to get this started, I had like a ghost Postgres instance running in the background and I had to, you know, troubleshoot and debug that. So I had to go on PowerShell. So it gives you like a lot of practice with these things that you would potentially face in a real world code workflow, like things like, you know, I said like complex features and complicated, like this code base is pretty complicated. You know, we're using Next.js server actions and all that. That's what I'm working on now. I'm working on server actions. Let me run it. I will say it's not very visually complex at this point because we've got a lot going on the back end and we're still working on the UI features. Let me see what this. We've also got a staging branch now. I think it's like staging dance chives. Not sure. Okay, so like you see, it's not very like visually complex because we're not really working on the UI features as much right now, but like the point that we are the the point that we are trying to do right now is really trying to get this like data flow troubleshot. I'm not even gonna, I'm not gonna make a test account right now because it's on the local host, but let me see what I get on the staging branch. This is our staging branch. So you see like how the profile picture right now is broken. Okay, that's, yeah. So this is like something I would debug, the fact that the profile picture, I think we're debugging that. I think it has something to do with like the, see, this is what I'm talking about. The fact that it had that, like, when I went to another page, it had that login loop. This is exactly the kind of thing that we're trying to fix right now with some of the features that we're trying to fix on this. Yeah, it's fun though. Debugging this kind of stuff is really fun. I'm learning a lot about, one of these issues was caused by like Next.js's the next off and use session. We had like a redirect, and I think he was using use session too much, and that's what was causing one of these, but I don't know why it's still broken. I mean, I guess that's something to look into. But it also gives you like, I mean, it's great for collaborating. Oh, my account is gone, I see, but those are Ben's accounts. So this is an example of our test data here. So these are an example of like what we're building. Again, we're gonna clean the UI a lot on this. But so these are how like the users can add the dance events. We also have we're integrating the maps, like the Google Map API. I think that's something that needs to be fixed a little bit here too. But you see, we have the calendar feature. We're setting it up to add dance events to this calendar. So this is all stuff that we're working on right now. And like I said, you know, hopefully once we get all this fixed, once we get the staging fixed, he's even registering it as an LLC, and we're looking to hopefully go public with this and maybe even make it a real application. So this is a big open source that I'm working on right now that's also kind of doubling as a startup. So I'm working on like one startup and open source that's also kind of a startup. So yeah, like I said, just like let me know if you have any questions or just any thoughts. That's a lot of what I'm working on right now. I can probably keep talking about that, but yeah.
So if you have like any question, you can raise up your hand. So the tutor will like should attend to it. Then probably if your background is kind of bad, you can put the question in the chat.
Yeah, I did want to take a pause and ask about questions because I know I was talking a lot and I think I was talking a little bit quickly too. And I know sometimes it's hard to, I think sometimes it's a little hard to maybe wrap your head around the flow of this sort of thing if you've not really, you know, forked an open source, and like started contributing to it. These are also, these are kind of like my Discord servers, like that's Dance Chives. You see like where we're talking about making it a real LLC. And that's us like talking about the different issues that we're facing with like Nextdoff and JWTs. So this is something I really love about open source. I really love how like if you find the right one like this, you can also join a Discord where like, you know, you have that community aspect. And then this is the Minesweeper game where, you know, he's showing, I also am showing these Discords because you see kind of an inside peek of like, these are, Nick just made a PR request, or he made a PR where, you know, he refactored some features of the Minesweeper game. I have not made one of these for my Wordle game just because I haven't really had any other contributors besides Steven when he contributed a bug fix, but this just gives you an example of how if you make an open source or you join one, sometimes they have these small Discords, and I find that these are really good for networking and for kind of getting your work out there, especially if you actually do show up and do the work. Like with Dance Chives, we have weekly meetings in our open source. Every Sunday we do a meeting. This is me trying to troubleshoot the bug, or not every Sunday. We do work on Sundays, but every Wednesday we do a meeting. And this is an example of like, here you have like our documents for Dance Chives. So we have an overview of like what the application is, the main features, nice to have features, setting up the tech to do Discord server. You know, see, so as you see, we have our Figma links, we have the authorization, everything. This is like the high level overview for everything that we're doing in the open source, even like how our monetization plans. So it's very organized. What's your regular approach when looking for a project to contribute to? Search on X or maybe local tech communities, or just searching GitHub? Yeah, that's a really good question. I will admit that like how I got into a lot of these was I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I post pretty regularly. Like when I was building my Wordle game, I was posting pretty regularly about it, and so some developers would just kind of reach out to me like, do you want to participate in this, or do you want to you seem to be, you know, pretty active, you're doing things for your community, I have this project I'm working on, would you like to work on it with me? You get a lot of that if you're just kind of actively talking about your coding somewhere visible, whether it's LinkedIn or maybe another place. But also, I specifically made a post one day saying that I wanted to contribute to open source, but I wasn't sure where to start. And Ben, who runs Dance Chives, he reached out to me and told me about Dance Chives. And he's like, yeah, I'd be willing to train you if you worked with me on Dance Chives. And I thought it would be a good mentorship opportunity. So I was like, yeah, sure. And that was back in April. And I've, you know, been working with him all this time. But for other people, like if you would be asking in general, you know, what's your approach for looking for a project, search on X or maybe local tech communities, I would say any of those would probably be good. I know there's a big tech community on X. I have not really tapped into that. I've kind of wanted to, because I think that LinkedIn gets a little insular. It's mostly it's a lot of the same people, and I kind of want to grow beyond that. But I know there's a big tech community on X. If you ask around or just start talking about tech on X, you probably can find some people. Local tech communities, I'm sure would be really good for that. I did join a meetup group. I haven't really, again, contributed a lot to it, but I did join a local meetup group, and it was good for, I found some open source and some other tech community stuff on there. You can search GitHub. I would also say maybe Reddit. I think Ben has advertised Dance Chives on Reddit. I think there are maybe some advertisements there. I would just ask around. People will probably give you repos that are like good for beginners or good for people who want this or that. There are like whole repos dedicated to like certain kinds of open source. I would also say that I'm sorry, I'm kind of thinking. I would also say that like if you use, I know earlier I spent some time kind of saying don't worry as much about like the complicated type tool stuff. But if you kind of do dip around different communities, or you use a particular tool and you do like ever think about wanting to like contribute it or read to it, like again, for me, this would still be higher up right now as far as complexity. But like, let's say I'm using, I don't know, Next.js or something, and I do kind of have maybe in the back of my mind something I think that is a little not optimal. Even if I don't feel ready to contribute to that yet, just kind of knowing that it's out there, knowing what open source is out there can be good for kind of in the back of your mind. One thing I notice when I go to websites for specific technical tools, like, you know, Neo4j or Playwright, for example, I noticed that they often have like kind of these associated communities. Like there'll be like a Discord or something like that. Like I know this is a big one, but I'm in like the Reactiflux Discord, for example. I think those communities, those ones that are immediate, and places like Discord like that, I think those are really good for collaborating, because I think that sites like LinkedIn and etc., maybe X, are not really as good for like the immediate collaboration stuff as those Discords are. So I kind of recommend trying to find smaller ones and joining them. Like Reactiflux is great, but maybe ones that spring off Reactiflux. In terms of like tooling stacks, maybe stuff like I don't know if anyone watches some of these like tech YouTube, but like I've watched some of the T3 stuff. I believe that they're open source, and I think they have a very collaborative community. It might be worth it to look into something like that, or even some of these AI startups are actually, I think some of those are actually open source. So I would look if there's just a website or like a product that's kind of interesting to you, I would look and see if maybe it has an open source component, or even if it's closed source, there may be like ways to contribute. You can even ask ChatGPT or AI, like, what are some good modern open source that is tools and stuff that are hitting the market now, or like some of these little startups that might be hitting the market now, that you might be able to get in and collaborate, and they might hire you if you do that. If you're contributing regularly, if they don't hire you, they might at least make recommendations. You're showing that you can do the work, and that's a really big thing. The one thing I would say about that, though, as someone who's worked on these open source, one thing I do have to like make a note of is that I have very often observed that people will come into these open source and then they don't really contribute. Like, there are inevitably people in every open source project that I've been on who they don't really contribute. And I think maybe they want to, maybe they just don't know where to start. But like, I always encourage people, really, like, if you're going to do this, really go in and like try to contribute. And I have made a decision recently. I showed you guys like 4 open source projects that I'm working on. I have recently made the decision to step back from a couple of these so I can really focus going all in on like 1 or 2, which is also something I would encourage. Like, as cool as it is to find all these open source, I really think if you can maybe take like 1 or 2 and stick with it and really make your mark on it, that's probably going to be the best way to go, because you'll be remembered for working hard on that. Like I said, Ben told me that like I'm the person who, besides him, who's done the most work on dance chives. I'm there every week. Every week in our weekly meeting, I'm there. I'm working on the features. I'm helping plot all this UX stuff, going over like all this kind of things, all this kind of stuff every week. We're treating it basically like a startup. So I think what I would encourage for getting started is, if you want to shop around, like if you want to try a couple of different open sources, that's cool. But if you really can like kind of get in with one and really like kind of make it yours, that's a big thing. Being able to collaborate like that with other developers is a really big thing that people will remember, because we can build our applications and that's cool, but at the end of the day, if you're on, not everyone is really collaborative. And like I said, that really gets you remembered, and it can really make a big impression. So yeah. Peter's having a lot of reactions. I think maybe he's known some situations like the kind that I'm describing here. Yeah, sorry if I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I kind of have strong feelings on that, because like I said, it's a tough market, and I know a lot of developers really will talk about being how they're very, passionate and they want to contribute. But when they get the chance on these open source, so often I see people not really doing a lot. So yeah. If anyone has any questions or any thoughts, again, I'd be happy to talk about it. Yeah. I will, before I finish up, let me actually do something real quick, guys. I'm going to, let me see about like, I'm actually going to see what I get on like if I try open source for beginners. Oh, thanks, guys. I thought since I'm talking about my open source projects, I thought I would talk a little bit about what are some good open source contributors for beginners. Funny, someone linked github.com. Okay. Yeah, these are, this is interesting. So like something like this, like I said, Reddit is a really good resource. This is Python focused, but Reddit is a really good resource for open source. I would also say if you have a particular stack, like I'm a React person, so I hang around like React Reddit a lot. That's how I got into React Flux or communities like that. You'll probably just see people talking about their projects and how they'd like to be involved in open source. This looks like it's actually for beginners. So if you want, I'll recommend this website. I haven't taken a look through it yet, but this is like good first issue. This is like for beginners. And even for the ones that, like I said, may be a little hard and complicated to contribute to, something like VS Code, for example, um, you can still read like the bug fixes and stuff. Like I would be intimidated to contribute to something like that unless I'm like, when I get to be very senior, maybe I will. But like I still like to read the bug fixes and read through the change logs and stuff, because you learn so much, and it's really great practice for, like I said, like real world programming and stuff. But this seems like a pretty good resource. I wonder, like I said, I mentioned T3 Stack. Let me see. I think it's open source. Yeah, T3 is open source. This is really cool. It's a collection of open source technologies used for building full stack type safe web applications. Um, One of the creators of this, the OT3, he is actually a popular YouTube content creator, and he talks a lot about these different stack tools. And so this is this is also something that is it's really good. It's for creating a type safe Next.js app. I've wanted to. I have not really experimented with this, but I wanted to. I use a lot of these tools. I use Next.js, TypeScript, Tailwind, Prisma. I haven't had a chance to use TRPC yet, but if I incorporate GraphQL in one of my applications, I will. We're using NextAuth and Dance Chives too. So again, this is another really cool open source. It has a really great community. I would love to, like, if I had more time and I just was looking for open source, and once I get some of the things done that I'm working on now, this is one of the open source that I'd love to contribute to. So so yeah, these are a bunch of the different options that are available. But like again, caveat, like I said, and I don't think, I mean, I know you're all developers, so I don't think this will be a problem, but the little caveat with complete contributing to open source is people shouldn't do it just because they feel like they need to advance their careers. We talk about Hacktoberfest, which is open source in October. It's like a whole month dedicated to open source, which is a cool idea. But there have been some problems because there have been some developers, particularly like very early in their career, who they just want to contribute to open source, kind of to have the cred of like being able to say, I've got a PR approved in open source, without like really having a thing that they want to change or fix in open source, which is cart before the horse. And Theo, who made T3, he actually has a YouTube video talking about exactly this problem. He talks about how like some developers come in and they like try to fix like a typo or something, or they try to get something merged just to get something merged, and how that is really the wrong attitude for open source. So I do, even as I'm talking about this, I do think I should probably point that out. Like if you want to contribute, it needs to be because there is something that you like actually meaningfully want to like modify. Like maybe you're using VS Code or something, and you think, well, this or that aspect of the extensions could be better. And that's at the point where you're like, that's where you go to look how you can contribute to, or fix a bug or whatever. So it you know, like I said, that is the big caveat with open source, because some open source maintainers have actually complained a little bit about, during Hacktoberfest, there have been people who, you know, were just trying to push to open source just to like have that cred, and didn't really know what they were doing, or, you know, weren't really understanding the repo, and so that was causing a problem for the open source maintainers. So I think it's a wonderful thing. Like I think this is an amazing thing, and like I said, it can advance your career, it can it really can create credibility, I think, faster than most paths. But you just have to have that, like, kind of know what you're doing a little bit. And that's why I recommended something like Minesweeper, something like Dance Chives, or something where it's getting started with it and it's like kind of a community effort. It's a lot of fun. These applications are so fun, working on these and kind of having people who, like I said, like Ben and I have become friends. We have a great synergy when we work on Dance Chives. It's great. We kind of keep each other going as like code buddies. That's one of the best benefits of open source. If you get one with a community like that, you get friends and everything. Okay, so just, I guess that's really most of what I have planned to talk about. Just let me know if there's something else you'd be interested in. I'd be happy to find more for more options for you guys, or kind of like, anything you want me to help you take a look at. I know there's always a lot of questions about, like I said, how to get started, what's available. See, this has a lot of this has a lot of stars on it.
You should first
Oh,
start with questions like, have they actually like contributed to any open source project before? And uh what are the issues they actually came across while contributing? Maybe that can be like a form of discussion.
you mean
So I
like,
don't know if anybody
mhm.
yeah, can continue. I'm listening. Um
So was your question like, what kind of issues did I encounter that made me contribute to open source?
no. I'm talking about those listening, the audience. I'm talking about the audience, like if they've actually contributed to any project, any open source project before, and what are the issues they came across while contributing to those projects.
Okay, so are you asking the audience what issues they came across when contributing to open
Yeah,
source? Okay.
yes. Like, is there anybody that is willing to share that? Like, talk about that?
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. If anyone is willing to share about that. I'm always interested in others' experience with this. Has anyone here contributed to open source? Are you guys regular open source contributors, or just kind of dipping your feet in?
Okay, I mean, I'm with the open source Nest account, so I don't know if it's something I should be answering. But yes, a couple of us here have tried to, you know, give back to the community through code and whatever we find our hands on. Yeah, but since no one wants to talk, I guess I will talk. Mhm. I have contributed to a couple of open source projects, and both people that, or rather both projects that, other people are the maintainers, and project that I am the maintainer. So I mean, it's still part of the movement. So yeah.
I think that it's a really interesting experience. Like I said, I wonder, one thing that I'm curious about, and I know if people want to talk, I'm really curious how much my experience tracks with a lot of open source contributing, because I get the sense that the projects I've worked on are maybe a little bit personalized, like I was saying, they're kind of more almost like just public applications, right? Whereas, like I said, I think a lot of people, when they think of open source, they think of more, like I said, very formal, like Next.js or Prisma or something like that, like a tool that you use in your coding. And I know that that's not all of open source. There's a lot of other stuff, but like something like Dance Chives is almost more of like a sort of a startup, but it's open source. So I'm wondering if people have contributed to like that kind of application, or if it's been more like kind of formal, like code flow stuff, or like what kinds of applications people have contributed to. Have there been communities associated with these open source, like the ones that I was talking about? Like, does anyone participate in discords or like groups for open source like that?
Um, well, speaking for myself, no, I haven't used the whole Discord for open source. Okay, I think no, I'm not that active on that. That's an Afghan OS. It's still in its early stages. It's an operating system, and yeah, but I guess I'm not so active with the community. A couple of persons, at least based on my experience, what I know, live people, not not online. I think they rather get with the whole GitHub first issue, or rather, sorry, good first issues, and sort it out, and just I think that's how most people try to, at least for beginners. Then the experienced persons I know who have who have contributed to stuff like Ethereum, uh, maybe because they are more experienced, they just
Yeah,
get into code base, and they don't have to go through the whole uh, you know the whole flow and ritual. Yeah, and though now I still think about, maybe I'll still talk more about it later. I think organizations should be more willing to invest more on maintainers. Okay, community managers for their various projects. Yes, because it can get overwhelming. I was at looking at Firefox's code base sometime this week. I wanted to raise an issue and help out with something. And uh, you know, Mozilla is quite organized. Yeah, they are very organized. They have the whole org Mozilla site. Like everything is sorted out well. If you really wanted to, um, what's the word? If you wanted to help out, like everything is like clearly sorted out, and there is a whole chatting system with a matrix where they have different clients. And my key takeaway is just that the maintainers were like very helpful, because from the point the bug was raised, all the comments or the follow up, like they were quite fast in my opinion, and it was not just from one person. So I think that that's something that other maintainers, you and I, should should emulate and actually try to add to our workflow. I mean, yes, I understand it's open source, and people are giving it from their own time. Yes, I mean, nobody really, really paid for open source. Like most
that's
of most
right.
of the
Yeah.
projects are not so profitable. But um, while respecting everybody's time, I still think it's important to invest in that, this whole community bonding. Because I mean, imagine maybe if the support I got from Mozilla was very poor. I'm pretty sure I would not even have proceeded to raise the issues I did, and the likes of that. So yeah, that's just my own 2 cents for now.
Yeah, I mean, what, like, when I have time, like I said, I'd love to, once I've used a lot of these tools more, I'd love to contribute to something like this T3 stack. Like, I think that's a really cool, I discovered this particular open source on, like I said, YouTube, because I watched this content creator, Theo, and I think that's a really good way to just find these kinds of open source. Like, maybe it's just like a tool you use, or it's just something that you think is cool, and maybe you're poking around the documentation website and you notice, oh, they have like a community feature. For me, it's just that balance of wanting to contribute to things, but also having to kind of prioritize my time. Like I said, if I could, I'd probably try to contribute to a lot more than I do, because it would be fun. But I just, I've had to kind of prioritize. Like right now, I'm going all in, like I said, with Dance Chives and with the startup, trying to get those out the door. But it's good to have these things, to know that they exist, and to, like you use the example of Mozilla. If you're improving something that is used by a lot of people, that's a really big cred right there. People will appreciate you for it. It's big bragging rights. If it's, if we were able to work with a group of people and they're able to see you do that, like, people remember when you're in a small coding group of other coders and someone has a bug or they need something fixed and you like step in and you help them, people remember that. Like, I mentioned the Reactiflux Discord, and there's like a whole channel in there where people talk about like the bugs they're facing, and like there's been times where I jumped in and I help them debug the thing. And like, the developers who have that attitude, who come in and they help with things, they will always kind of help you stand out, and it will mark you as like someone who's collaborative and someone who like takes the initiative to help others and to like work hard on that stuff. It can open doors. It's a form of networking. These are all, I think, important things that you can see open source as being. And I think it's so cool. Like, I think it's so cool that you have these, like, a lot of these are public companies, right? Like, these are like something like VS Code or Mozilla. Like, these are, the fact that this is like just out there in public, that it's something that it's used by all these people, but it's just available, that like you can go in and without asking for permission, you can work on this organization's code base, like you're an employee there, and then maybe make yourself an employee because you're working on their code base. That's pretty cool. Like, it's not always that simple or straightforward. I mean, you kind of have to know what you're doing and know, what you're contributing to, but it's still pretty cool that that's even a thing that exists. So yeah, I do encourage developers to try to navigate this, even if it seems a little, confusing at first. Like, where do I even get started? How do I even get started? Even having to ask around, do some digging. But I do encourage people to try to get their feet in there, because like, once you do, it can open so many doors. It's a way of reaching out to people who, part of the reason I talked about applications like Dance Chives and things like the Minesweeper game is because it's part of reaching out to your peers, people who are on the same level as you, not just necessarily like CEOs and people who are like above you, but people who, you grow as they grow. Like, I feel like with application we're building, like I said, I feel like me and Ben, we're kind of growing together, kind of supporting each other. And if this takes off, if it becomes a business, we've kind of made it together. He's doing a lot of the work, obviously, but like, I've been kind of supporting, debugging, helping with all this stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there. So my advice, I guess what it boils down to, my advice, just kind of feel your way around. Like, maybe start, like I just did, best open source for beginners. Maybe look around those. Maybe ask on like LinkedIn or X, hey, what's something that, are there any projects? You don't even have to say open source. You could just say, are there any projects that people are looking for contributors on, like coding projects? And I bet you will find people who would love collaborators. And then maybe you kind of scope a few out, and then you'll kind of start getting started in that, collaborating. And then, like I said, maybe once you found a few, maybe try to like figure out which ones are working the best for you, which ones seem to be, you're getting mentorship from, or you're finding that you're making meaningful changes to, or whatever. I've been on both sides, because like in the Minesweeper game, I was doing a lot of mentoring and a lot of code reviews, whereas on Dance Chives, I'm more being mentored, having to help a lot, learning new tech as I go. So it's a little bit of everything. It gives you a little bit of everything if you kind of dig in and you get into it. But yeah, I'd love to know more about people's experiences, or kind of what people would like to contribute to for open source. I mean, if anyone has any ideas on like products they like, or things that they know are open source that they'd like to contribute to. I mean, like I said, my Wordle game is open source. Only thing about that, the only thing about that really is that yeah, thank you. It's I am nowadays working on applications that are a little more user targeted than that. And so I haven't really set up like a timeline of other features that I want. You must love it. Well, I haven't really, like, I need to maybe set up a back end and stuff, and it's not as high priority for me just because, like I said, I'm trying to build more like, I mean, it's a fun application. Don't get me wrong. Like a game is a really fun application, but I'm kind of moving a little past games in general, but it's a good learning experience. And if you like, I mean, if someone can help me like get my tests fixed or set up a back end, that would probably be great at this point. I need to set up a roadmap for that. That's the other thing. If you're running an open source like the Wordle, if I were to do this, I'm not really doing this right now, but like my friend who's running the Minesweeper, he's learning a lot about like running a project like this. He often talks about how it's leveled him up more like from the engineering manager side, because you have to make a lot of calls about PRs and about like architecture and about what everyone is doing. Sometimes people are pushing PRs of different things and there are merge conflicts, and running an open source means you kind of have to navigate that if you actually get collaborators. So yeah, those are all like practical issues that you can run into. But it's interesting because that makes a really good resume story. Like, I approved PRs, or I handled the flow of, or I navigated, different kind of, I guess, ideologies about code contributing. Because like in the Minesweeper game, for example, I recently, we ran into some issues because there was someone who was pushing a lot of PRs, more than a lot of the rest of us, kind of like smaller PRs. And, we had to navigate, the PRs were kind of piling up because a lot of the others of us were maybe not as around as much as this person was that was pushing all these PRs. And like just trying to navigate that kind of stuff on a team, it's like a real world workflow. So there is value in all that. So yeah, it's been a really interesting experience. And for me, as someone who, I am working on the startup, it's a complicated situation, because the startup is just me and the founder. So I don't have a team there. It's just me like iterating the startup myself. So that's one other reason I work on all this open source. It's because I am trying to get that team interaction so that I know what I'm doing in my work, and so that I'm keeping fresh for like, getting hired for positions where I have to work on a team, that I can speak to this experience and I can talk about the things that I've worked with to keep my team skills fresh. So to me, that's very important. Like I said, I want to make sure that I'm getting mentorship, which I am from the open source. That's probably one of the biggest benefits for me, is that I have learned a lot from working on these kind of more complicated code bases, from running into things, like I said, this is my first time working with Docker, and then like running into something when I'm trying to get like the DB set up like that, and then having to debug it. We can write code, we can write our own code, and we're probably going to know our own code bases. But it's an entirely separate skill when you walk onto someone else's code base and, you encounter bugs, and you have to debug something in someone else's code base. You have to understand their code and what that code is doing. That is what, like, a real world, like, if you're on a job, you have to figure out what that code base is doing. And that's an entirely separate skill from like building your own code base. Like I could go on my Wordle game. Well, maybe not now because it's been a while since I've worked on it, but I could go on my Wordle game and I could tell you most of what the code is doing because I wrote that code. But like, it's a whole other thing going into something like Dance Chives and seeing like all these, abstractions in Next.js and all these like server actions and props being passed down with spread, and like, yeah, yeah, how's it been with multiple people contributing to a project and avoiding merge conflicts? Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, honestly, I think that like navigating how you handle the flow of something like that is kind of it's part of the process, honestly. And we've had a few pain points there because, like I said, our approaches and our pushes were just kind of different. This came up in the Minesweeper project. where like, you know, we did some PRs fell a little behind, and we did run into some merge conflicts. And I think part of it is you do have to kind of accept that a certain amount of merge conflicts are probably going to be somewhat inevitable in a project with a lot of contributors. Like you can try to minimize that, and trying to minimize that is probably one of the things you learn from a workflow like that. But also sometimes you just kind of have to navigate a merge conflict. And I think that's one thing I had to do this. I had to navigate a merge conflict when I pushed to the branch or when I pulled from the branch. And I've just had to figure out, like, look at the code carefully and make sure that I know which is the older code, which is the code that I need to accept, and which is the code that I don't. So, you know, that's just part of the process, honestly. You rebase too. I did a rebase, which is a big thing. A lot of people kind of forget to do that, and like I won't say I'm some kind of expert on Git, but like remembering to rebase definitely cleans your code up and hopefully helps you avoid merge conflicts. With dance chives, I try to pull pretty regularly, and it's gotten a little complicated now because we've got like the local, we've got dev, we've got staging, and we're setting up for prod too. So we've got, sometimes things are a little different from one branch to the next, but yeah. You know, like I said, that's just part of the process. Ideally, in my opinion, we had some discussions recently on the Minesweeper game about like, you know, what should our PR flow be? Like, I personally raised the topic that I felt like that there were some issues that were getting a lot of PRs that I felt like were a little bit minor or cosmetic that I didn't really think that we needed to be focusing on, and that was causing like PR clutter. So like, you know, sometimes you have to navigate those. If you think that, sometimes you have to kind of navigate that kind of a situation. That was how I felt about things anyway. But you know, it makes you realize people have different approaches to workflow. And if you're trying to organize a team, you're kind of trying to organize those people's approaches to workflow. It's like, you know, coding it's not just like sitting in the back of the room like a gremlin and like, you know, pushing stuff out. It's also, you know, working with other people at the end of the day and trying to find a way that works for all of you. So yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting. It's been really interesting to work on, like I said, 3 different open source projects I told you guys about, in addition to my Wordle, which, like I said, it's not really had as much contribution, but like the built-in public, Minesweeper, and Dance Chives. All 3 have had very different priorities and very different scope, and that's what's been interesting because, like, so for built-in public, right, we had this we had a contributor who was like a very AppSec, like app security, and she, before we even signed up, we had like an app security agreement that we needed to sign to like make sure we understood security best practices. And she was kind of working, I learned a lot about app security working from her. She's kind of stepped back now, but with something like that, right? You know, thinking about like users and protecting user data and stuff like that. That was a huge thing with built-in public. Whereas, you know, it's not going to be as much of a thing for something like Minesweeper because we don't really have a back end. And then for something like Dance Chives, it is a thing, but we're not really to the actual, like, you know, we don't really have much user data at this point, and we're probably not going to have a lot because we're using OAuth for the login. So we've discussed it, but it's not as much of an issue. So you see like different priorities, you see different tooling, different kinds of structure in these different open source projects. And that has been one of the most interesting things to me too, is kind of seeing, like, taking a little bit from all these different groups and kind of how they approach things and thinking about it as well. Like at this point, I kind of am finding myself getting more product ideas for my own projects. Like I kind of have this idea for a product that I potentially want to build next year or sometime in the future as well that may or may not be open source. So yeah, it's really, I almost want to use the term like cross-pollination, right? Like you're learning a little bit of app security here, you're maybe being introduced to some new tools there. You have to kind of decide what would work for you. Like if I were building a product, would I want to use this tool or would I want to use that tool? Like would I want to use something like Neo4j and relational databases? Maybe I'd want to use Postgres. You know, at what point do I think about app security? You know, that kind of stuff. It's really interesting because I never you don't know what you don't know. And like for me, as someone who might have those blind spots, seeing people who are kind of specialists in these different things, that's been one of the really interesting experiences about these kind of collaborations. So yeah, I'll pause a little moment if anyone wants to talk or any questions.
So thank you very much, Amber, for taking us through that. Thank you. You guys should share, like, show some reactions. Let's appreciate our instructor. She
Thank
has
you.
given us like a wonderful uh, dive. So if you have any question, you can raise up your hand or you can drop it in the chat. If there is none, less than 5 minutes, we are going to be ending our section. So thank you very much, Amber. We really appreciate your really appreciate you. Thank you for your class. Thank you for the section. I've learned a lot also. Being even I'm not really a first time person in open source contribution, but I've learned a lot. So yeah, somebody is asking for your socials, probably your LinkedIn or your Twitter. So you can drop it in the chats and let's give you like a follow.
Thank you. I'm going to get my LinkedIn. Sorry, I'm actually pulling it up right here. This is my LinkedIn. If anyone wants to connect, I'll send it in the chat. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's actually, it's great talking about this, and I really appreciate the reactions. So thank you. I hope that some of what I have said has been useful for you. I'm always happy to connect. If anyone wants to add me on LinkedIn, I'm always happy to connect with more developers. I'm always happy to network on LinkedIn. It's funny because like I think we all, no matter where we are, I think we all kind of have that imposter syndrome. Like I'm kind of thinking to myself, there's a lot more, there's a lot deeper I want to go in all this. Like maybe in the future there will be more open source and more things that I've worked on. But I'm also learning just like you guys are about all this.
Thank you. So we have come to the end of this section. This is day 2 of our code workshop, and we did day 1 yesterday, and we had our wonderful tutor Ayo come on board. Today is day 2, so our instructor just finished giving us like a deep dive on open source from the software engineering side. So thank you very much, guys, for joining. And we have finally come to the end of the program. So, bye and see you guys tomorrow. Have a wonderful night.
Bye. Thank you. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn and I'll accept. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.